Hello, it's good to be with you this evening. Thank you so much for your time. Before I begin, I'd like to tell a brief story. There was a study conducted some time ago, and those issuing this study wanted to find out how people walking down a street would react to seeing dollar bills hanging from a tree. And what they found was that a majority of pedestrians walking down a tree would not even acknowledge or look up at and notice the money because they were looking at their phones the entire time, and that distracted them. So that's what we're going to be talking about for the next couple minutes. We're going to be discussing sort of how smartphones have affected the way we behave individually, as a society, and with one another in person-to-person interactions. First, before we begin doing that, it's important to know a couple things that we're going to be discussing. One is that smartphones now have become the primary means of social interaction in contemporary American society. Second would be that it's become the main, or at least one of the most popular uses for recreational time. Most people report spending their leisure time with some sort of smartphone or other piece of technology. And finally, we're going to be able to talk about the increased debate, or conversation would be a better word, over what's happening in terms of education and smartphone use, how it's affected the way that we learn as human beings. So what we're going to be doing for the next couple minutes is just walking through various studies and surveys and the information that they have regarding these questions and discussing the implications that might have for us in American society today. So remembering the story of the money tree, we're going to discuss sort of how smartphones affect the way that we behave in society. So I'd like to take your attention to a Pew Research Center survey conducted by the Pew Research Center over a group of teenagers in 2018 and how they reported spending their time on their phones. And what they found was that 91% of teens report either spending most of or some of their time on their smartphones just to kill or pass time. 84% of teens said that they use it a lot of the times or some of the time to connect with people socially. In a separate study we find published through ABC, we see that average screen time for teenagers is about 7 hours a day, more or less. So all that considered shows that a large portion of a teenager's day is involved with a smartphone. This isn't just a thing with teenagers, it's also a thing in senior citizens. So a separate study done by the Pew Research Center found that a large number of senior citizens spend a majority of their leisurely time with some sort of piece of technology, whether that be a telephone or an iPad or a TV screen. So now that we've established that that screen time has increased, we're going to sort of talk about what that screen time is actually used for. What are cell phones actually being used for? So the cell phone use increase has been used to kill time and for other leisurely activities, as opposed to a lot of other things that have been happening before. So screen time is at an increase for things like streaming videos or playing games on phones, as opposed to things like creative entertainment, making music on technology like computers or phones, or writing stories through a computer, or even reading for pleasure. Those types of activities are at a decrease, whereas streaming services are almost doubling. The amount of teenagers streaming every single day has gone up to about 64% compared to about 39% as of 2015. So we see these numbers going up, and we also see numbers like leisurely reading going down. So 34% of teens surveyed said they found themselves reading for pleasure less than once a month, and that's lower than what it used to be. Moving on, it's also important to note that there's been an increased societal conversation that's happening over how smartphones are affecting the way that we learn and the way that we're educated as a society. So, in an article in The Atlantic, Nicholas Carr points out that the way that technology works today is that the human mind is submitted to a large number of different pieces of information so that it doesn't really retain everything quite in the same way. So the example that Carr uses in his article is that you're looking in your email, and then you get a news article and you get a text message, and there's an ad on the side of the screen. And the person looking at that is getting so overwhelmed with information that they can't possibly retain all of it. And the way that affects education is that it lowers the level of retention. But he also points out, he gives a brief history lesson at the end of the article, that this is an issue that's come up with every single technological innovation throughout history. So, for example, he references the printing press. At the advent of the printing press, there were large concerns that it would hinder or weaken a lot of educational systems because people would be less likely to memorize things because they would have it written down somewhere. And while that is technically true, as a society, we've obviously largely benefited from the invention of the printing press. So his point is that it's had negative and positive benefits and consequences. So, and that's kind of what I want us to walk away with. The question that I want us to walk away with is what to do with all of this information. So we've discussed how smartphone use has transformed our society. People are interacting differently, they spend their leisure time differently, and they're even learning differently. So I've deliberately left the moral dimension out of all of these things because the purpose for all of this is to give you, the individual, the information necessary to have this conversation. Because what we can't do is walk away without making a decision based on all this information. We're all obligated to do something with it. So our society is going through rapid technological changes. So now we have the privilege of being part of this culture where we can have a conversation about where we can go with these things. So yeah, that's sort of what I want to do. I want to leave you, the individual, with the information. And hopefully you are here now to make the best decision based off that information. So all in all, I want to thank you so much for your time, and I really appreciate it.